We've got a lot of exciting Lord of the Rings Online news today, and we owe a lot of it to a recent Q&A with the executive producer Severlin, which could be worth checking out yourself. So what news do we have? Well, we have a couple of Standing Stone Games sources developers pointing to update 33.2 being released sometime this week, and that will have the new race and class combinations as well as the minstrel revamp and some significant PvMP changes. We also have more details on the Before the Shadow mini expansion, and we learned quite a bit about next year, so we'll talk about that as well as some general content and systems updates. But before all of that, we have to talk about LOTRO Remastered, which means that yes, we have actual confirmation from Standing Stone Games about specifically graphics updates, overhauls, and improved graphics fidelity coming to the game. Now, a bigger concern to me personally than the graphics is going to be the user interface and how poorly it scales with high resolutions, such as with 4K monitors and TVs. They have confirmed that there is UI work specifically with 4K resolution in mind as a part of what they are calling LOTRO Remastered. On top of that, they are working on an overhaul to improve the graphics fidelity. This will largely include older art being raised up to modern standards. And with that, we can expect to see a couple things. One is just old tech generally being improved, and two is going to be changes to textures and lighting were specifically mentioned, and that these changes will overall show a good visual improvement in the game. Again, they are working on all that as a part of LOTRO Remastered. For timeline, they will likely have more information in early 2023, but perhaps later this year even. What we did not get out of this though was they did not get into how this LOTRO Remastered will be deployed. Previously, the developer said that it will be like iterative updates over time, even over a couple to few years period. So no one like single major update that would just suddenly turn the graphics better. So we don't really have any updates on that or the timeline, but if you are curious why this is such a big deal to me despite rumors of a graphics overhaul, check out this video where I go over details on just that. Now, the other big topic before we get into content is going to be lag, which players have been complaining a lot more about lately, myself included in that group. So they did mention that they have identified some recent causes of lag spikes, and actually one of them is they were going through this process of cleaning data that they were doing big work on the database in the past couple weeks, and that should be done now, and moving forward the process will be run regularly in the background now. But why this is significant is ironically this process of cleaning data actually was causing lag, even though it's meant to make lag better in the future. And then they identified specifically quest system and deed system database causing a lot of lag, and they noted particularly skill counting deeds and quests as being particularly problematic, so we might see some revamps to those in the future. And now we can finally get to content, so let's start off with some roadmap plans that they have for next year. So something that is pretty regular in LOTRO is a major update at the end of each year or in the fall of each year, and this has come recently in the form of either mini expansion or full-blown expansion. They've kind of been alternating those since they started the mini expansions, and we will have this big thing next year basically. This one will be most likely a full expansion. Now what we have are details that people who like the smell of salt water will be pleased in the coming years, what they said. Despite that, it seems unlikely that they are developing an olfactory virtual reality technology, and I also don't find it too likely that we'll get Bright Life's idea of submarines taking us underwater to Numenor. But still, it is something that is exciting and gives us players something to think about. I'll probably have a video on that topic in the future and possibilities. But they also said unlikely there will be a ship sailing like naval combat type system, and they might have some ship interaction, so that hinted more at ocean or sea things. Besides that, we also got some information on Update 35, which would be the first major update of 2023, and that one will have some substantial end-game content, including an instance cluster. They are still in the planning stages of this though, as it is quite far off, but the goal for them is to have more than one 6-man and more than one 3-man instance, which will be nice. Now, unlikely to go with Update 35, they are also in the planning stage for a raid next year. So basically, next year is going to be them focusing on endgame content leading up to the expansion and level cap increase that will go with the expansion in the fall. Now for what we have coming later this year, we have update 34 Before the Shadow mini expansion. And there are a lot of things going on with this mini expansion, but some of the updates that we have from the Severlin Q&A is, number one, we still will find more information out in September, but he talked about the mission system, the skirmish system, and 6-man instance that is coming with it. So for the mission system, one of the big things coming with Before the Shadow is going to be the delving system, which is going to be implemented specifically into Before the Shadow missions. Now the idea with the delving system is you will have different tiers of difficulties. It kind of works like the mythic system and WoW for anybody that is familiar with that, but basically at higher difficulties you get better rewards. They did note at the highest difficulty level the rewards will be comparable to tier 3 raid gear is the goal. There will be different set bonuses and the timeline will be a little bit offset, so people who do the raids can get the gear like earlier than people who just get it through the delving system. So how can you get the gear in the system? Well, they will have a new currency for gear, and gear can just directly drop from the delving. So that's basically like instances and instance bosses that we have right now. They also did note that traceries will be acquired in the delving system, which will be much welcome to many players. And then for the long term, they said they have a lot of long-term plans for this delving system, which to me is great news. So they are hoping that they can adapt it to skirmishes down the road and even to 3-man instances. One of the developers working on implementing this mentioned specifically school and library at the Meridyne are going to be the first 3-man instances that they are going to be looking at adapting this to. As far as future instances and perhaps even more modern instances or new instances released to the game, Severlin mentioned that they do have to do a lot of thinking about they have the regular tier system for dungeons, and then there's a lot of complexity with adding a delving system on top of that, so we'll have to see how that goes. I have some thoughts on that, but I'll refrain myself for this video. As far as progression goes, the natural progression is you do like tier 1 delving, which will unlock tier 2, which will unlock tier 3, so on and so on until you get through all the tiers, but you can actually jump around difficulty if you would like, and again, the whole point of running higher tiers besides just fun and the difficulty is you do get better rewards as you delve deeper. Finally, with the Before the Shadow skirmish, they did say they are working to make it rewarding, because right now the skirmish system is like not rewarding and for the most part at least not really worth participating in besides character XP and specifically essence reclamation scrolls. But outside of that, yeah, skirmishes are not rewarding, so they are trying to make sure that it's definitely worth running the new skirmish coming in Before the Shadow. They did say whatever they are going to do to make it rewarding will not necessarily be retrofit to old ones in the Before the Shadow update, update 34, but maybe eventually. It's something I personally would like to see. Now for Before the Shadow, outside of all the stuff that we have talked about, it's going to have 2 new zones for levels 1 to 32 and a new intro starter experience like the one you get that is an instance version for your character intro. So how you do that is you will be able to choose which starter zone you want to do at character creation if you want to do the Before the Shadow starter area, and you can of course travel to it later if you do wish. So as with all characters and all races, the starter instance is only available with a new character, but higher levels can go and play through like just the story and quests and the zones if they wish. Now they did mention that this will not be in Before the Shadow, but they are wanting to make it so you can actually choose whichever starter zone and intro experience you want, no matter which character you are, like how dwarves and elves have the one in Era Luin, and then the hobbits and Race of Man have the one in Archit Breland. So they're looking to make that a little bit more flexible so you could just choose which one you want. And then we'll have a lot more details about Before the Shadow coming later this month, but they did give us a few sneak peeks that 1, VIPs will get a discount. So if you're a subscriber to the game and pay that monthly or however often you do it fee, you will get a discount on the Before the Shadow mini expansion. And 2 is that the upper bundles will be better than War of Three Peaks, the only other mini expansion that's been in the game, and the upper bundles, even the medium bundles, were not all that well received. I also will point out that an XP disabler with stats, so something like the Stone of the Tortoise but actually having useful stats for your character, that popped up in the current beta for update 33.2 a little bit early, but that's likely for Before the Shadow. Now Severlin acknowledged this item, so yeah, that's basically a confirmation that we do have that coming in some form in the future. Now I have some other general but still important notes for next year. The first one is they have no new news on River Hobbits, so they still have it as maybe next year but no guarantees on it. It sounds like it's something they wanted to do and even had planned but had to shelf the idea of River Hobbits for other things to take higher priority. But for the races that are currently in the game, they are working on new character customization options. They said they had the most progress on Race of Man, and what they are testing, and one of the reasons it's taking so long, is they have sliders in testing, which takes a lot of work to change like facial features. Also, they will have just general new styles to go along with that. Shifting gears, they are also working on a new launcher, which to me is long overdue. The current one we have for LOTRO is really feels archaic, even if it is technically functional, and that's more of a long-term project that they have in the scoping stages. And kind of similar-ish to that, they are working on account security and multi-factor authentication. They are aware of concerns with accounts getting stolen. This is something I was considering actually making a video about. I still might. But one of the reasons they said is that sometimes people will contact customer support actually trying to steal an account and get access to an account which they don't actually have, and there are a lot of issues with that. Severlin mentioned some background reason is they just need a lot of proof that you are the real owner of the account, even though again we have heard issues from players getting access to accounts that presumably they are really the legitimate owners. Now we do have a few notes on servers, notably Shadowfax and Treebeard. Some people were curious what would happen to them when they reach the level cap and caught up with endgame, and kind of like Anor, they will shut down unless there's a huge player base on them that warrants the server to stay up, but they're pretty flexible on what happens to them depending on how the server is actually doing. Similarly, for Shadowfax and Treebeard, they have this unique system called the landscape difficulty system, and they are still expecting to move it over at some point, but we don't really have any real news on that. And then finally for servers, in the case that there is a large influx of population because of ongoing, say, Lord of the Rings events and the Before the Shadow mini expansion, they are prepared to have a temporary overflow style server. They have the capabilities for that if there is any concern people have with that. And finally for the servers news, we have closed server information. This is where like people are stuck on one of these closed servers and unable to transfer. They are basically saying the same thing with there being progress but not really done on that, so honestly who knows with this. And outside of all that, there were more minor things. One thing I do want to highlight though is with the minstrel revamp that has caused a lot of concern and perhaps just thoughts from different players about what they might do to other classes in removing a specialization and making whatever trait tree that they remove, rather whichever specialization they remove, making that trait tree be supplemental to the other specializations. So they want to see feedback and the impact from the minstrel revamp before they get to doing that with the other classes. So depending how that goes, they might do it with other classes, and if other classes do get that, it will improve this issue of what Severlin called throwing away trait trees. So I think it's a great thing that they are pretty fluid there and will react to feedback on the minstrel revamp feedback. And final thing for classes, this basically happens every time, but balance is ongoing work. And that wraps up all the news from the recent developer Q&As and announcements. We do have some exciting things to think about, and I must say I think they did a fantastic job with this executive producer Q&A, and it's really great to see the improvements there compared to the previous ones. If you have time, I definitely do think it is worth checking out, and you can get all the small details that I skipped over in the interest of making this a shorter video. But for me, in some future content, including streams, I will get more into my opinion of these things, but today I just want to let you all know the raw news. And if you did enjoy that and learned something useful, please consider liking and subscribing for more or becoming a channel member to support the content, and thanks for watching everyone.